74% of the dentists have applied for Paycheck Protection loans. 50% may or may not have had that approved, and 34% are still waiting. So financially, dentists are doing not that good. Are we past our peak? Well, I don't know. It depends what the peak are. Bridgeport Hospital, which I have a lot of information from because my workout partner, Stu Zarich, is chief of cardiology, peaked 2 weeks ago with 230 patients with COVID in the hospital. Today, they have 150 people in the hospital. So there's a decrease. So we're past our peak. What does that mean? Will there be a secondary infection? Will there be a secondary infection in a few months? Will there be a secondary infection at all? So we have two global problems when it comes to the virus: a lack of information, because we have a lot of information that's coming at us and we don't know where that information is. We joke about fake news, but the reality is we just don't know what's true and what isn't true. And the reality is we just don't have a lot of science yet. And there's certainly a void in leadership. And what happens when there's a void? Fear. Okay? And I've talked about this before. We have a lot of fear. And fear is an acronym for fear. It's called false evidence appearing real. So a lot of people are creating things that fill that void and they get a little scared. So our goals are the same. We want to save lives. We want to return to public life. We want to get back to normal. And we have to keep the economy humming, but we don't have any real protocols for that right now. And we're sort of inventing this as we move along. There are many unknowns. And so what have our main tactics been? Social distancing, prevention, antibody tests, antigen tests. Now, Ray called me up yesterday and goes, "Did you hear about the new antibody test?" And I go, "No, I didn't hear it." Because it goes at a 98 to 99% surety. That is true. And so I did a little research. Well, it's not one antibody test, but there are 13 of them right now. And there are 100 more being in the pipeline. And what about the antigen tests? Well, 30% are false negatives. So you can be tested and you can be negative, but you may have the disease. And you may have the disease before you have any symptoms of it, because it tends to spread before you have any symptoms from this disease. So the main problem is that the incubation period for this disease is much longer than influenza, so you may show no symptoms, and it's a lot more infectious. 90% of the people who develop this disease have no symptoms. A very small percentage do develop complications. So what's happened is people have been fleeing to the hospitals. So for every 100 people that go to the hospital, 80 are dismissed, but they're not dismissed until they hang around the hospital for 12 to 15, 16 hours. The hospital is not the best place to go if you want to avoid having disease. So people are getting sick by going to the hospital where there are patients that have COVID. And of that 20 people that stay, 4 to 5 go to the ICU, and in a lethal rate of those about 5%. That doesn't mean that this disease is lethal 5% of the time. It means that of the people that were tested, 5% died. But we're not testing many people, and the tests are flawed. So what we've done is we've turned hospitals into incubators due to the amplitude of fear. So we've increased fear. People are running to the hospital. Hospitals are getting overrun. And the news is reporting on this. So it seems like we have a lot more disease than we have. And the algorithms for this disease come from a very small percentage of people in China. So we want to flatten the curve, and I do agree with that. I think that's very important. But is that curve going to be flattened and then going to spike again? Because we don't have any herd immunity. And, each year, we have millions of people infected by the flu. Hundreds of thousands of hospital visits where we test for the flu. But the death rate from the flu is 0.1%. If you have chronic disease, it's going to increase significantly. How much? 40 times more. So if you have a chronic disease and you get the flu, the death rate is going to be higher. But most of us don't know anybody who's died from the flu. But most of us do know somebody who's died from COVID. I know 2 people, including a relative, that has died from COVID. And as we go on and learn, we find that there's more and more symptoms, besides the shortness of breath and the chills, there's now this headache and the sore throat, loss of taste and smell. So people are panicking and go, "Do I have COVID?" And my wife turned to me yesterday and she goes, "I think I have COVID." So we went for a walk in the woods and the COVID symptoms went away. I know I can be psychosomatic too. I can sometimes feel that something's wrong until I'm tested to find that it's not. So the big question for us as dentists is, can we get it from dental aerosols? Probably, but there's no data that shows that yet. There's no data. And in dental aerosol, it may be a lot less. In the aerosol, especially if they rinse for 1 minute with hydrogen peroxide before we start treating them. HIV is found in dental aerosols, but we're not afraid of getting HIV in the offices anymore. So there's no data that we can get COVID from a dental aerosol, but that's our big fear. And people are very afraid of using aerosols. And they should be, because we don't have the information yet. And the problem is we only have one expert in this country, Dr. Fauci. He's the expert, he's speaking for everybody, but there's many more people than Dr. Fauci in the world that have this information. We should have teams of people working on this, but we have one person speaking, and he's being looked over by politicians behind his shoulder. He can't really say everything that he wants to say, because people are going to judge him. He's got to be very political. So what's the data on COVID? Let's look at first influenza. The world cases, and this is from 2018 to 2019, I don't have this year's data yet, there are 1 billion cases of influenza, 1 billion. How many cases of COVID? Take a guess. I'll let you think about that for a second, but how many cases? We had 1 billion of influenza in 2018. How many of COVID? 3.5 million, significantly less than 1 billion. How many deaths from influenza? 640,000. In the United States from influenza, and this is 2018-19, there were 81,000 deaths. Now, what about the world cases from COVID? Well, there have now been almost a quarter million deaths, 248,000. In the United States, we have this is from today, 1.18 million cases of COVID, and thus today was 68,500 deaths. So we're approaching the same number of deaths from COVID as we did from influenza. The difference is it happened so quickly, we weren't prepared for it, it came very fast, and it's very infectious. And the death rate varies depending upon testing. So we don't know what percentage of us that get COVID are going to die. We think it's about 0.1%. It's not 4 or 5%. And we also have some other weird data. The United States has 4.25% of the world's population, 4.25. There's 7.6 billion people in the world. 4.25% live in the United States, but we have 1/3, 34% of the total cases of COVID. So we have 8 times as much COVID in the United States as the rest of the world on average. Why? We don't know. We don't know that yet. Maybe it's because we didn't practice social distancing. China had a lot less. There are some countries like Cambodia that didn't practice any social distancing, that haven't had any yet, but they will. Russia didn't have any, but now they are. So we all die, and those of us who die right now from a chronic illness, there's a good chance we're going to have coronavirus, so we're going to say that may be the cause of it, but it may not be. It may just be an accidental finding. There's some natural immunity that has occurred in Wuhan, which had the highest infection rate in China. Only 3% of the people in Wuhan caught the disease. The Diamond cruise ship, the Princess, which was basically an incubator, only 20% of the people on that ship got the disease. In Italy, almost 80% of the people who died were over 90 and they were sick. So we really don't have the data on the transmissibility of this virus, but we have a tremendous amount of panic. The daily death rates today, the daily death rates from tuberculosis are 3,000, for hepatitis, 2,400. Today, 2,100 people in the world die daily from HIV, 2,000 from malaria. And guess how many people die a day from car accidents in the world? Over 3,000. But we still get in our cars. So what's the good news? Well, the good news is that this is probably a practice pandemic. It's uncovered all the break points, all the weak points in our political system, in our medical system, in our social system, basically in our own psychological system too. The press has dove into this as they should, because that's what attracts people to buy the news. And they've worked with our fear. And there's a lot of fear out there. I try not to look at the TV because I'm not going to get information there. The FDA, here's the good news, has been very cooperative and it allowed us to iterate faster, developing diagnostics and millions of tests. We're probably going to have a vaccine sooner than rather later. We're taught usually the normal vaccine for the mumps vaccine took 5 years to be developed. This vaccine, probably they're talking about next summer, but there's a very good chance we'll have it by December because they are now pushing it ahead, not doing the normal things that we normally do. We're working very hard to develop a vaccine. We're working very hard to develop stem cell therapy to target specific cells with the NK, the natural killer cells. There's a lot of work in stem cells. There's going to be a lot of work in vaccinations, a lot of work in virology, immunology. That's going to really move this ahead. Now, we always said that you don't want the cure to be worse than the disease, but is the cure for this disease worse by creating this, not only this fear, but is shutting us all? Some people are, are by themselves. There's psychological problems. People are getting sick. They're being isolated. There's an increase in depression. It's not only dentists that are being affected in medicine. It's, all surgeons are down. All surgery is down. It's down about 95%. I talked to the surgeon at Denver Hospital 2 days ago, and there's no elective surgery. Cardiologists are not seeing many patients at all. There's a decrease in heart attacks, but there's probably an increase in depression. So this pain that we have right now is going to be an impetus for us to work on a cure. We have millions of scientists all over the planet cooperating and competing. Okay, competition does spurn growth, but there are also a lot of them are working together. And we have probably about 60 or 70 companies working on different vaccines right now. But we have a lot of fear. And Dave Rosiani shared with me something that Professor Scott Galloway wrote, who I wasn't that familiar with. He talked about the fear zone. And that's where we are right now. We're in the fear zone. We're scared. We don't know what's going on because we have misinformation. But then we're going to learn. We're going to learn a lot. We're about to enter the learning zone. And once we have some information, then we can grow and we can beat this thing, which we will. We will, as we beat everything. And I've shared with you, what Kubler-Ross talked about is, On Death and Dying, something that she wrote about in the 70s. And she talked about the 5 stages of denial and acceptance and anger and all that, of grief, really. We have a lot of grief right now. First, it was denial. Politicians came on, we're going to beat this thing. They called it the Chinese virus. It's not the Chinese virus, it's a virus. So we denied it was there. And then we got real angry. There's no silver lining in that. And then we said, well, maybe we can bargain with this. But right now we're all sort of a little depressed. I noticed that everyone was in a great mood over the weekend, but I went out for a run this morning and everyone was sort of low. They were low again, because this is still here. And it's going to be with us for a while. But then we'll accept it. And when we accept it, we're going to move on and we're going to find a cure for this thing. And our concern as dentists are our safety, our effectiveness, and our income. Our patients also have concern. I'm getting calls, as you all are, every day. Can I come in? When can I come in? When can I get my implant? When can I get it uncovered? I have an infection. Dentistry isn't a luxury. It's an essential service. And untreated, unchecked, it leads to decay, periodontal disease, endoabscess, space infections. And we're not talking about doing veneers and Invisalign. We're talking about serious diseases that people do have. So we have to prepare for all this. And I'm not going to turn this over to Dave, and he's going to talk about some of the preparation that we need to do. We have to prepare our offices so that the patients and our teams can return safely to dental care. We have to prepare our physical offices. We have to get our staff ready. We have to get the right personal PPEs, personal protection equipment. And we have to figure out what procedures can we focus on upon opening that are in the patient's best interests. So I haven't clarified anything. I've just really shined a big light on how confused everybody is, because we really are. And I've been reading a lot, as you all have, and we're trying to do whatever we can to make our offices as safe as possible. And I'm going to let Dave share on some of the things he's done, because he's taken the lead on a lot of this and has shared with me a lot of information. And Dave is a practicing periodontist in New Hampshire. He practices with his daughter, Amy. And he's one of the brightest guys I know in periodontics. He's just a bright guy, and he reads a lot in the medical area. He reads the New England Journal of Medicine routinely for fun. He studies quantum physics for fun, string theory and black hole theory and all of that. And that's not the kind of stuff I read for fun, but he does. And so I've asked him to come on and to share his perspective. And he's in a hot zone right now because he wanted to open up today, but there's a lot of panic up there because our staff is afraid to come back. And I see a lot of my staff members are on this call. So by the way, for an example, our planning day to come back right now is probably May 20th. That's what we're shooting for, with some sort of a soft opening. We're still preparing our office, and we're waiting a little bit longer until the curve flattens a little bit. Well, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.